Hello everybody, good evening. I hope na lahat po kayo ay nakakain na at kayo po ay sitting pretty na sa inyong mga bahay. We would like to also say hello to our teachers who are watching right now. So maraming salamat po for attending most of the webinars that we had in GEG APAC Weekend Live. So this is our last session for today, December 5. And yung guest po natin today, actually weird nga kasi hindi ko alam kung dapat ba siya yung guest o kami kasi nasa YouTube channel niya kami. But for our speaker, our presenter, no, for tonight, so actually hindi siya Miss, Doctor siya, Dr. Almond Aguila. She has an interdisciplinary PhD in secondary education and communication and technology from the University of Alberta in Canada. And she mentioned before that as a PhD student, she was an educational technology mentor. Wow, educational technology. And she is also a teaching assistant in her supervisor's online course, no, in the same university. And one thing that I think magandang banggitin dito is that from 2015 to 2019, Dr. Almond was the e-learning specialist for ADB e-learning. So if you guys know what ADB is, it's the Asia Development Bank. And she has done a lot of online e-learning, no, through Moodle, Blackboard, Illuminate, Google Sites. So if you have any questions for tonight, please do not hesitate to ask. And by the way, just so you know, maganda yung jump off natin kasi previously Adrian talked about, making DIY videos for your classes. Did you know that her YouTube video, her YouTube channel and her Facebook page only started last August? So it's very, very interesting, no? So without further ado, let me introduce to you si Dr. Almond Aguila. Hello, Almond.
Hello, thank you for guesting on my channel, but you're introducing me now. Thank you, Teacher Paula. So can I bring in my my slides? Let me add that to the screen. And Teacher Paula, should I keep you there?
Oh, you can put me at the backstage, and I'll be right back when after you presented.
Okay. So tonight I'll be talking about teachers are not cyborgs, what you should know about technology to teach effectively. So next slide, please. I think there are two slides that are extra. Another slide. That's what Teacher Paula was talking about. So let's start with the word cyborg. You probably are wondering, what is she talking about? She's talking about sci-fi, cyborg. If you're familiar with Star Trek, you know that the Borg is a collective. It's a collective of machines that are out. It's actually a race, a species, an alien species out there trying to capture humans and other beings. So to be part of this collective. And there are a few things that you should know about the cyborg that I think is quite relevant to us being teachers during this time of the pandemic. So the first thing is that the cyborg or the Borg is a collective that frowns upon individuality, humanity, uniqueness, and all they want is efficiency. And this means giving up humanity for efficiency. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit of me and my experience as a teacher. So in my undergrad, I took up journalism. And for a while, I was actually a practicing journalist. Early on in my career, I was recruited as teacher. So I never had an education, an undergraduate degree in education. So my first years as a teacher, I believe I became like a cyborg. And this is why I'm here to warn teachers about how our understanding of technology can get in the way of us teaching our students effectively. So earlier on in this century, I'm a little old, if you can tell, but when I was new into teaching, my idea of preparing for my class was putting everything on my presentation slide. So that meant my students would come to class with me projecting my slides and having them take down notes. I'm sure some of you can relate to this. So there was a time when I was talking about this particular book while my students were taking down notes. And here I was talking about this book, and I got my students really interested in the book, so much so that since I lived very near campus, I had this bright idea. I told my students to keep copying my slides and to keep just pushing the slides on as they wait for me. I left the classroom, I left the campus to go get the book and come back. It was only years later when I realized that that was the stupidest thing that I could ever do. So next slide, please. Douglas Rushkoff, who's a media theorist, talks about how we should either program or be programmed. So I'm talking about not just software in terms of coding, but understanding exactly what technology does to us. Next slide, please. So this is what I want you to remember about this presentation is the idea that technology is much more than what we think. It's not as simple as we think. So before I began my PhD, in fact, in the beginning of my PhD, I remember attending a class where I was asked, what is technology? And all I could say was that, oh, technology is a tool, it's a gadget. Whenever I asked students or any of the audiences in the lectures that I've done in public, what technology is, they immediately bring out their phones or their laptops or their tablets. But technology is more than just the tool. In fact, if we go back to the etymology of the word technology, it comes from the Greek word techne, which means technique. So if that is the only thing you remember in whatever I'm saying, I'd be quite happy, because that alone is a deeper understanding of what technology is. So what is technique? It's art, skill, craft, system, or method of making or doing something. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. Haven't done this since July. So there are a few components of technology. So if you think of the board as a collective, let's think of technology also as a collective. It's a collective of three major components. First is the device or tool. The next is the technique or method. And the third is information. Next slide, please. So if we think of educational technology, it's not just Google Suite. It's not just whatever conferencing app you're using. It's not just Google Classroom or even Google Sites, if that's what you're using. So educational technology is composed first of the device or tool, which is the computer, internet, and the apps. You can include Google Suite there. And then you also have the technique or method, or the teaching approaches, or pedagogy. And the third is information or course content. An example would be math, or it could be science, music, language arts. Next slide, please. So what I want you to remember is that technology is not just the machine. A big part of it is human. That's us. As teachers, we have to do much more then just focus on one of the components of technology. Next slide, please. So instead of allowing the machine, like the board, to take over, it is up to us to master technology in all its components, not just one component. Next slide, please. I want to give you more time to ask questions, so please keep thinking of what you want to ask, practical things that you want to ask about what's happening in your classes. So before I talk about failure to master educational technology, as teacher Paula has mentioned, I'm teaching now at the University of the Philippines. And if you've been reading the news, you know that students are now asking that the semester end abruptly because they think that we're actually failing at remote learning. They're not happy with how things are. And I think a big part of it is because of our perceptions of educational technology. It's not that teachers are not capable. We are. It's just that it's how we use technology that's where the failure comes in. So let's go through each of these three components, because for you to master educational technology, you have to master not just all three, but three together, like a collective. So if you focus only on the device or the tool, which is the computer, the internet, and apps, and this is what I've seen, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a rush to learn all these tools. There was a rush to attend webinars, get certified on how to use Google Suite. But there's a failure in that because educational technology should not just be about the technology. So what are we able to do? You're able to start a video conference. You're able to mute your mic, unmute your mic, turn your camera on, turn your camera off. And then you can invite your students. You can have your students be in the same conference as you are. But the question is learning actually happening? Are they learning what they're supposed to learn? Are you able to use technology for the learning? Or are you too busy working on the buttons, making sure that you're being heard or you're being seen? Next slide, please. So according to McKnight, a successful digital conversion is not determined by the technology, but how the technology enables teaching and learning. In fact, sometimes the technologies we use distract us from the learning. So instead of focusing in on what should be learned, we're focusing too much on having to learn the technology itself. Next slide, please. This is going to be a very short presentation, so I hope you have your thoughts ready so we can discuss. So the next common mistake is focusing only on the technique or the method, the teaching approach. I have heard my students really complain about how teachers are still insisting on doing lectures. So instead of engaging your students in your video conferencing, in your synchronous learning, you're busy trying to force what we had in our physical classrooms. So let me show you the difference of teaching approaches in terms of 21st century learning. Next slide, please. So this is 20th century learning. This is what we're used to. You have your tables facing front. There's a teacher's table. There's a chalkboard. Of course, now we probably have a screen or a whiteboard. But this is the traditional classroom. And what do we do in our physical classrooms? We do lectures. We do presentations. We do graded recitations and demonstrations. Next slide, please. And I'll go back to that slide again in a minute. So student-centered approach. This is 21st century learning. And look at the difference between this classroom and the previous classroom. So these are the types of approaches to learning. So you have problems-based learning, gamification, design thinking, inquiry-based learning, experiential learning, cooperative learning, competency-based learning, project-based learning. There are many other kinds. If you look out there on the internet, look for more. There are more. The thing about teaching approach, pedagogy, it is not just about the teaching itself. It talks also about much more than that. And this is what I learned when I took my PhD, which really opened my eyes to what teaching means, what teaching practice is. So a large part of pedagogy is relationship. It's your relationship to your student. So can we go back to the previous slide, Ms. Maan? If we go back to the previous slide, I mentioned the layout of the classroom. So immediately once I enter a classroom, I already know what kind of teaching and learning is happening there. So you can see that the power is really on the teacher. The teacher has the power. The teacher is the expert. The student is supposed to just face front, keep quiet, and listen. And this comes from how the university was formed during the industrial age. That's why we're called batches. So students come in as empty vessels. They know nothing. And teacher knows everything and pours all the knowledge into the student. So there is no collaboration. The teacher is always the expert. The student has no contribution. If you see the lecture, the presentation, the graded recitation, the demonstration, the responsibility for learning comes from the teacher. This is why most of the time teachers feel so exhausted because they feel that the responsibility is only theirs. But if we move on to the next slide, 21st century learning, you can see even by the way the words are made, the terms refer to collaboration, co-learning, all the four skills, 21st century skills, if you remember, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication are all there. You don't even see where the teacher is. So everybody is on equal footing because there is no expert in the room. I remember in my PhD, that very thing that my professor told us was that there's no expert in this room. I'm not an expert. In many ways, you also are the expert. You also teach me something. So if you approach learning in this way, I think many teachers will feel that responsibility as shared. So it's not just the teacher who has the responsibility for the learning. The students should also share in that responsibility. Okay, next slide, please. So if you remember the previous slide, I was talking about how the teaching method, if you make it, sorry, I'm going back. Ms. Maan, can we go back to that slide? Previous, one more. I forgot one more thing. I forgot to discuss exactly what happens when you focus only on the teaching technique. So what happens when you just focus on teaching in a particular way, regardless of the technology you use, is that you don't make it appropriate. So really, you have to make it appropriate to the context. And the context that we have now is that we're not in our physical classrooms. We can't do what we used to do before. So then learning doesn't happen because you keep focusing on forcing a type of teaching technique that may not be aligned with the technology that you're using. Next slide. Can you move several slides? That's the one. Previous slide. Sorry. Okay. Now let's focus on what happens if you only give importance to information. And I see a lot of mistakes being made in this way. So remember that in remote learning, what's important is understanding. Forget about content coverage. My students have been complaining about how teachers are burdening them with so many readings. They have to read 100 pages a week for only one course. Or they have to submit how many exercises for the week for only one course. And the students are undergoing so much stress, which is the next slide. A lot of our students, and I see this happening with my students, and not only my students, even my niece was complaining about her high school teacher who, she's taking statistics under this particular teacher, gave her 14 quizzes for 1 quarter. They were given for one quiz, they were given 15 minutes to complete the quiz. But when they were discussing it, they spent 2 hours discussing the same quiz. So remember, stay away from just content, because learning is the most important thing. It's not being able to finish all of the materials. Next slide, please. There are some comments. Let me see if I can put that up. Okay, the current curriculum is OBE, but since teachers are still hooked on the idea of 20th century classroom, they think that the new curriculum, more homework. Any tips for these teachers? Like I was saying, Camille, and I probably said it after you had posted that comment. What's important is really understanding. Stay away from content coverage. You're just overloading the student. That's lower level thinking order skills. There's another one. Okay, what is the first step to make teachers move from 20th century classroom to practice, like 20th century classroom practice to a 21st century classroom, and how? The first thing really is to change your perspective. It's very difficult, Gary, because we're all products of 20th century learning. I'm a product of 20th century learning. I only learned about 21st century learning because I studied abroad. So the problem with just telling the teachers, you should embrace 21st century learning is that they don't know what that is. They haven't seen it yet. So it has to be demonstrated and shown for you to understand how it's done. I feel like, wow, Camille, I feel like this is an issue with distance learning because teachers would bombard them with homework in the current setup. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm almost done. So after I'm done with my presentation, I can have Maan and teacher Paula here and we can start discussing. So the mastery of educational technology means the mastery of all three. And I'm not talking about I'm not just talking to teachers. I'm also hoping that I'm reaching out to Dep Ed. I'm reaching out to administrators because this has a lot of implication on teacher training. So it's not enough to learn the technology alone, but how do you use technology for your pedagogy? How do you make sure that the information, the content, becomes teachable through technology? How are you able to put all those three together such that learning actually happens. Next slide. So I think this is my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to open it up for a discussion because I believe it's quite relevant at this point. So according to Mishra and Kohler, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing them up as well. Quality teaching requires developing a nuanced understanding of the complex relationships between technology, content, and pedagogy. Nuanced, meaning it cannot be one size fits all. It cannot mean one school will apply everything across the board. As teachers, you know exactly what your students need to learn. You know what kind of subject you're teaching and what is applicable. So even if the technology is available, all the features are there, you still have to ask yourself if it's appropriate. Do you need to use all those bells and whistles, or are you just distracting your students? I'm hoping Gary is saying that please enlighten the admin. I'm really begging the admin. I'm begging DepEd to please listen, because this is exactly why we're failing now. That's why we're failing our students, because of that. So let me take out Gary for a minute so I can tell you exactly what I've done in the last couple of slides. Next slide, please. Ay, hindi pa pala. Meron pa pala, sorry. Tao lang naman. So the 21st century teacher is now not the teacher we were before. We're now an innovator, a mentor, a motivator, an illuminator, a catalyst, a curator of knowledge. Meaning there's so much information out there. It's at the tips of our fingertips, right? All you need to do is search Google. You'll find everything. So why are you asking your students to memorize the capitals of countries when they can just Google? It's very easy. Instead of doing that, point them to certain places where they can find the information that they need, and they can process it to create knowledge. Information is not knowledge. And what I've added to this list, because this list actually came from a video that I watched on YouTube, which is what I used in my previous webinars to introduce what I talk about 21st century learning. The last thing that I've added is instructional designer, because that's exactly what we are now. We're instructional designers. And the presentation that I've given you does not just apply to remote learning. It applies to different kinds of technologies. In the beginning, I talked about my experience when I was working with presentation slides as a teacher who didn't know what she was doing with technology. So I ended up becoming the software. If you think about it, I became part of the slide. I walked out of the classroom, I left the campus, and I allowed the slides to teach for me. So I allowed myself to be obsolete by the technology. I was no longer needed by my students, because everything that I was going to teach them, I put them on my slides. Next slide, please. Ay, nawala. There's one missing slide. That's the one, sorry. This slide is what I tried to teach in the last couple of slides. This is called the TPACK Framework, the Technology, Pedagogy, and Content Knowledge Framework. This is a framework that they've been using around the world for teacher training in terms of technology, how to integrate technology into teaching. And it's being applied specifically now to e-learning by different countries around the world. So last slide, Ms. Maan. May I just invite you to please watch my other videos. Please subscribe. I created this channel particularly for students, for teachers, because I want to help. The things that I've learned, I want to share. So, can I bring back my colleagues?
Hello.
Hello, welcome back. I'm
Hello.
glad that you are alone. Can you let me can you expound more on your experience teaching during the pandemic? What changes did you do? How were you able to engage your students? Do you give individual exams? I no longer give exams. I haven't given exams since I got back from Canada because I realized that that's lower order thinking skills. Memorization, which is nothing. Parang after a while, you forget about it.
Mhm.
What have I done? I've given them more. Um, I've given them more. Can I ask the two of you to mute? Baka that will help our feedback.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's better, right? Okay, so what I've done is I've asked them to. So previously in my physical classroom, I would assign them to write reflection pieces. So instead of exams, I give them more papers. And in that way, you understand what's happening in their heads. You know that they're understanding. And because we're doing remote learning, I gave them more opportunities. I gave them more options, which is what you're supposed to do. You should allow them to be independent because that's what learners are now. We're supposed to be student-centered. So I gave them options. They can do a reflection paper, or they can come up with a vlog, a video, an infographic, and they've embraced this. And I have such wonderful videos. And what I've done is I don't use Google Classroom only because I'm a lecturer at UP and they weren't giving me access. So I had to use Google Sites. So what I did was I had one page which I called a gallery of our learning gallery, our teaching and learning gallery, learning and sharing gallery. So what I was doing was I was rewarding students who were doing really well by posting the best of the best. So that's they really felt very good knowing that I made their work exemplar. So what I did was and this I've been doing since before the pandemic, I would use a descriptive rubric to tell them exactly what I'm looking for. So you have like a table, it's like a criteria of what I'm looking for, but it's more than just saying that I'm looking for creativity, I'm looking for clarity. I actually describe what clarity means. I describe what creativity means. I describe what insightfulness means. And then I highlight, this is not something that I invented. This is something I saw from my supervisor. So what she would do is she would highlight the things that were, so it can be in between, diba? It's like several columns, 4 columns with different grades. It can be in between. And then in the comment section, you put exactly what your feedback is. And what I learned from her is that you give the positive before the negative. This is not the time to put down our students. This is the time to bring them up. So you start with the positive. It's not lying because you're just focusing first on what the strengths of your student are before you tell them the bad news. Of course, you still give them negative feedback, but without destroying their motivation to learn. And then you tell them what they need to do to be able to do better. So for your next paper, I expect you to do this. Or if you do this, you will improve. That's a good point, Dan. Sorry, that's a good point. Well done, rubric. So students know what is expected of them. And I go beyond that. So aside from the rubric, they've seen the rubric. If they're still lost, they don't know, what is she looking for? Why am I getting a lower grade? That's where the sharing gallery comes in. They see exactly what I'm looking for. So I congratulate the students and I tell the others, if you're wondering what I was looking for, this is an example. So examples are very powerful. So instead of giving you that framework that is so dense, I was going through it in a way that was more, hopefully, relatable. Formative. Yes. Yes, yes. Yes. Formative is more important than summative assessment. Formative allows your student to learn. Learning is a process. It's not at the end of it. So I want my students to hear my feedback such that they learn. That's what learning is about. They came into the classroom, they came into your class not knowing. So there. Okay. Hi, Maan. Gary, let me.
No, I think no, because Nate from the GEG Nagoya is actually in the stream right now watching. So
Hi.
he's from Nagoya, Japan, the GEG leader from there. And so he was interested in what it is that we are discussing for today. So there were very good points that you raised, Doc Almond, and we were taking notes, Pao and I, know, as you were doing your discussion. But I really love the point that you said that, that technology is not the end all and be all of distance learning. And I think for a lot of educators out there, when they pressed the panic button, it was because of their intimidation with technology. So it's a really great point that you wanted us to take a look at technology as a vehicle to teach the content rather than what will prevent us from doing so. So that I think that was one of the best things that I picked up from
So
this talk.
the,
There are
the
some
most important thing is the teaching and the learning. So more than anything else. In fact, Douglas Rushkoff says something like, what will define us is not the technology we use, but those that we refuse to use, because maybe they're not appropriate. So not everything should be used.
that would
Yeah.
be right. I think there's some questions in the chat box, really some things that we might want to be able to address. There was a question here on how to create assessments. I know you've talked about rubrics. Is there any other way apart from rubrics for us to be able to assess our students?
Um, I do a lot of so I divide my assessments in terms of individual and collaborative work. So I bring them together into groups. So that helps also unburden you. So instead of checking, for example, you have 30 students. Instead of checking 30 papers, you're going to just check 5 because you group them together. And that still plays into 21st century learning because they co-learn. They teach each other. In fact, my students were telling me, Ma'am, we're so appreciative that you grouped us together. There was something that I couldn't understand. My classmate was able to explain it to me. So they're able to learn together instead of just you teaching everything. So I don't know if that answers the question. So I divide my assessments throughout the semester. And what I do is I have them present slowly. Like I have a final project. I divide it into, I think, 4.
I agree.
So I have them propose the topic and then I give them feedback. And then, in fact, what I've done, and Mina knows what I've gone through this semester. That's why she's asking. So what I used to do before is that I would schedule a presentation date where I would grade them. But I always have a hard time because they don't get what I'm asking them to do. And I end up giving them another chance, meaning I have them the next week. So instead of doing that, we said, okay, let's do it differently now. What we'll do is we'll have a dry run. So we'll have a dry run. I'll give you feedback. I'll allow you to to improve on it, such that the next meeting you're able to present better. And that in that way, I'm able to teach them as well. So
It's
the rubric
interesting that
also,
you mentioned that because scaffolding is nothing, it's not new in the education sector. It's not new in terms of, I mean, I'm pretty sure that during the 20th century, the 20th century learned teachers actually know what scaffolding is. It's just that I am really not sure where the difficulty. I guess I keep on saying that when I train teachers, it always starts in mind setting
mm,
that we are not inside the classroom anymore. We are here at home and we have to teach virtually. So you cannot give the same amount of work that were giving. Actually, mali na nga yun eh. Yung you're giving too much work and then the work that you're giving is that doesn't really go to, building up to the final task or to the goal of the course. So
according
I
to
really
Nick, students will feel empowered from understanding that they can learn from
To learn from each other.
yeah. You have
That's
to
true.
empower your students. The reason why some teachers are so overburdened is because they're taking on too much. In
Mm.
21st century learning, the students are part of the learning itself. So let's not deprive them of that power.
Okay, Rosh Abelia in the chat box actually has a very interesting question. It's basically for TESDA or CBT, so competency-based training. And he's asking, can we use it or how can we use it in ODL or asynchronous or synchronous learning? Perhaps you can give him some tips on how to do that.
Test the competency-based training. Can we use it or how? Actually, most of the questions that are being asked of me by teachers or trainers can be answered by them because they understand the context. They understand, you understand your students. You understand how. So it's a time to innovate. Innovate. That's what I do. So what I did was I created my Google site. And then when the students came in, when my students and I were interacting, changed everything based on what I saw they needed. So it's very hard to give particular tips because I don't know what the needs are.
You would be right. But I think for maybe if I may, because it's competency-based training, that's actually a rubric in itself because there are actually skills that you are looking for. So what Doc Almond was describing earlier, which is, something that us in the basic education setup has used quite often, the idea of rubrics, that can also be applied, I think, in test towers and CBD, especially since the skills are very specific already. So it's whether or not they're able, let's say, to assemble an engine. I don't think there is a middle ground for that. It's either the engine works or it doesn't. And so the rubric actually works for you if you are in the test the setup.
Can I
Yes.
just give you one tip that I got from research also on remote learning? There was this study that was done on university students, and they were asked whether they preferred synchronous or asynchronous. And what they said was quite, to me, enlightening, that when it comes to knowledge, they preferred asynchronous. Meaning, when you're, instead of doing a lecture synchronously, give them a video of you lecturing. And the reason why they wanted asynchronous, because they could repeat it. If they couldn't understand it, they'll repeat it. But when it came to skills, which is what you're talking about, demonstration is important. It has to be synchronous. It's like when you're wanting to learn how to cook, you want to do it right there. You want to see your teacher doing it in front of you. So I don't know if that's far off from what we're discussing, but there.
there was one thing that mentioned here na yun nga because teachers hate change. Actually, in general, I think people,
Humans hate change.
yeah,
Humans
everybody,
are creatures of habit, diba?
yeah. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people panic during this time
Yeah.
because they have to learn, they feel like they have to learn all the technology, forgetting that technology supports education. And I keep on saying that when I train teachers, technology supports education. It will never be the other way around.
It cannot
Diba?
teach for you,
Exactly.
right? It can't
Yeah.
teach for you. So,
So even when you only know, let's say for example, you only know how to use Google Slides or you only know how to use Google Docs, there's already a lot of things that you can do
mm,
even when you don't have to learn all the technology that is being, placed on a plate for you. All you have to do is to use whatever it is that's convenient or use whatever it is that you're comfortable, and don't try to swallow more. Lalo na sa ngayon, because I told my teachers this. I remember having known a lot of new add-ons in the Google technology. But I told some of my teachers, I can't recommend that anymore because that means you have to learn it. You would feel like you have to learn
mm,
it. And I as an educational technologist, that would mean that if it comes from me, it feels like kailangan nilang gamitin. They have to use it, or else
required.
they're gonna get penalized because that came from me. So that's why after training them during the summer, I try as much as I can to step back and see if the training that we did is working. If not, then that means that I have to do more support in order
Mhm.
for them to use the technology that I taught them back then. I will not add up anymore
Yeah.
because that would only burden them.
It
And
was
then
actually
the
go
thing
ahead.
that
Go
you
ahead.
should not forget, don't focus on the technology.
Yeah.
Focus on establishing your relationship with your students and then find a
Exactly.
way that technology can help you. So,
Mhm.
how do you communicate with students? How will you know that the students are learning? In
Mhm.
fact, when I do our conference, the first few minutes I devote to asking how they're doing, because that's what you should be doing. You have
Right.
to
Like
know
check in. Yeah.
what's getting in the way of learning.
Mhm.
So times are not easy now.
Mm-mm. Doc, Doc Almond, there's also another question from Roche Abelia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I'm sorry if I'm murdering it in some way. So he's asking if collaborative problem solving more useful or relevant now that we're in distance learning or blended learning. How can we use it more efficiently and effectively in this trying time and in the current technological situation that we are in? I'm guessing he's talking about also the lack of infrastructure or the internet being unstable in some areas of the country.
Um, what I do is I allow the students to decide how they're going to do their collaboration. So you don't impose on your students in the same way that teacher Paula doesn't want to require her teachers to use a particular technology. Allow them. If all they can use is a landline, then use a landline. People still use that. So allowing the students independence, autonomy is one of the ways that it's based on self-determination theory. It's a psychological theory that's being used for motivating students for e-learning yan ha. So you allow your students to be autonomous. You also allow them to increase their competency. So one way of doing that is through the rubric, showing them, giving them feedback, allowing them to invest in their own learning. So giving them the initiative, yung as a parent, if you're a parent, you understand that there are times when you have to give your student the independence. Don't dictate everything and allow them to find their way. Parang give them a little more leeway in that. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It does. It actually gives really good insights. So really good insights have been exchanged tonight. It's almost the top of the hour. So I guess what we can ask for from Doc Almond, is there anything else, any message that you would like to give para sa lahat ng mga kaguruan natin really watching the show, and maybe later even on when they look at, because this is recorded, it's available in your channel. I'm sure they would want to come back to it. Is there anything that you would like to tell them now that we are in this very trying time?
If I may speak to DepEd, because I've seen your memos on K to 12. I approve because you talk about active learning. You talk about all the 21st century skills the students need to learn. But where are the examples? How do you assess? How do you apply that in the classroom? That's what your teachers need. Because, like I said, they haven't seen the demonstration of 21st century learning. So, how can they teach in that way? We can't blame the teachers altogether. So, the administrators, please open your eyes that it is not just getting certificates for learning how to use this particular app or software. So, there. I hope I haven't exhausted you with the things that I've said. And I hope, please, watch my other videos, all the other details that you might want to watch the videos to know the other answers. In fact, I have a series where I've interviewed Filipino teachers living abroad, teaching in schools abroad, them talking about the remote learning experiences and the strategies being used in different countries. So it's very enlightening. And in those countries, that's what they say. You cannot teach the same content anymore. You cannot assess in the same way anymore. So there.
All right.
So,
Thank you for those thoughts, Doc Palmon. Go ahead, Paula.
yeah, ako, I think one of the things that I'm really going to emphasize with what Dr. Almond mentioned is that it's really the relationship. That's where it's going to start. If you have a pretty good relationship with your students, you would know their needs. It's not going to be the technology that would wow them. It's actually the relationship, and plus, later on it comes hand in hand with the technology and the pedagogy and even the content. Kaya I really agree. I was so happy that you showed the diagram of TPACK, because while I was at the backstage, I was actually taking notes, and I remember that I just took that course in my grad school, and I was really recalling that this is very familiar. I think this is the TPACK framework. And I was so happy because most of the time when I talk about technology, it's always, it's not the technology. It's supposed to be all three blended together. You cannot just focus on one, because or else you will get burned out. And I also want to emphasize the thing that you mentioned, that focusing on the content would not only burn out your students, it would also burn you out, because that would mean that if you're giving them too much content, you're giving them too much assessments, then that also means that you have a lot of things to check, you have a lot of things to do.
That's what my students were saying. The teacher who was assigning so many activities wasn't even evaluating them yet. So they don't know how they're doing.
Yeah,
I
so
what you're
that's really
touching there is
that's a no no.
but I think,
So
one of the other, go ahead, Doc Almond. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
one of the things that I miss about teaching inside the classroom is, I know you can relate to this. This is my favorite experience when I'm in the classroom. You see this student come in every session, blank stare.
Mm.
One day there's this light bulb moment. It's heaven. And that's what you cannot see in remote learning. That's why you have to find a way to reach out to your students to connect, because that's the only way. Even when you do video conferencing, so when I'm praising my students and their video cameras are off, I can't even tell. So I ask them, are you as happy as I am? Because I am ecstatic that you're doing so well and you're not responding. I'm alone. I can just see profile pictures. And it's sad. Diba? Yung parang that's why you're a teacher. You want to see that light bulb moment which we can't see anymore.
That's true. It's very different with now that we are in virtual, but it's not impossible, or it's not, yeah, it's not impossible for us to see that, diba? Kaya nga, I really hope that a lot of the viewers, a lot of the ones that, especially those who are commenting on our YouTube live right now, I hope that you picked up some good tips, or even you in your own practice. Maybe I'm hoping that a lot of the teachers who are watching right now would feel like they can't wait to apply what they learned, coming Monday. Um, I would really want to thank you, Dr. Almo. This is a very good conversation. I mean, no, even when a lot of people know about this already, sometimes we just have to, stir up a topic, stir up why is this happening? Why is this going on inside our classrooms? Why are we burning out? 'Di ba? Yun yung mga magagandang tanong, and I think you hit the mark there. Ang ganda nung mga points mo on, yeah, the relationship, technology is not the superstar in this case. And we have to also remember that we are teachers.
Yeah.
We want to teach. But at the same time, we have to let our students feel, that
We're
they
still
also have
human.
choice.
Di
Yeah,
ba? We're not cyborgs. Still human.
exactly.
Tayo pa rin, di ba? Tayo superstar. I'd like to invite you to my next webinar. I have another one on December 11th. So I'll be giving more tips. If you liked what you heard, please attend that one as well. So I am trying to really reach out to teachers. This is coming in late 21st century. Ngayon pa lang tayo nagsa-start because nag-pandemic. But
Napilitan.
otherwise, we were stuck in the 20th century. Tignan niyo yung classrooms natin. They're all the same. But if you go to other, I'm sure in the progressive schools, iba naman. Pero in all of the universities, di ba? Parang
Yeah.
it's so sad.
So I really want to thank you for taking time that you
Thank you.
are, you're telling us these things. And I really invite all of you guys, if you're watching our webinar right now, one, please do not forget that we have an evaluation form. The link is right at the chat box. Um, we would love to hear what you think about the session that we had right now with Dr. Almond. Just like what she said, please join her in December 11th. Is it going to be here also in your channel, Dr.
No,
Alma?
it's going to be on Facebook, on the PSSC website. It's in the description box.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's there. And then try to see the other videos in my channel because I will recommend especially those series that I had with Filipino teachers abroad. It's very interesting to find out what's happening to them and what they're doing there compared to what we're doing.
Yes, indeed. So once again, everybody, I would like to thank you for taking, for joining us this evening. Shout out to our fellow GEG leaders. I can see Nathan Gildart in the comment section. Mina, thank you so much for joining us also. And thank you so much, Mina, for introducing us to Dr. Almond. And at the same time, hi, Sir Gary. And thank you so much even to Camille. I see that she is also in the comment section, and to every teacher who watched our webinars today, and especially this segment. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay po kayong lahat. Kayo po ay sabi nga natin, 'di ba, hindi lang nurses at doctors ang frontliners ngayon, even
Yes.
tayong mga teachers. So mabuhay po kayong lahat at maraming salamat po. Tomorrow, by the way, we start at 9 a.m. So tune in with sa last day ng ating GEG APAC Weekend Live. There would be more surprises, and I hope that a lot of you will be able to join us, especially at sa 8 p.m. session natin bukas, kasi it's going to be the wrap-up session. And we will be giving out vouchers for the Google Certified Educator Level 1. And of course, that's for free. And at the same time, you will be getting certificates once that you answer the evaluation link that we posted. So once again, this is Paula, and I have Maan and Dr. Almond with me. Maraming salamat po, everybody. At good night po. See you tomorrow, everybody.
Thank
Good night.
you. Bye.
Bye.